Kelsey.
A very hopeful Shane McGalley.
And I'm David Keener.
And this is the Hourlings podcast project. Tonight, Dave's driving the bus. Dave, take it away.
All right. Tonight is about a new subgenre called Hopepunk. Now, the term Hopepunk was first coined in 2017 by an author named Alexander Rowland. And it's basically about a genre that emphasizes cooperation and communal response to challenges instead of necessarily violence and sort of this hopelessness that genres like grimdark tend to espouse. So having introduced that, what is your definition of Hopepunk? What's it mean to you? Start with Marty.
Well, I am really not all that familiar with subgenre of Hopepunk. I am hoping to learn something from the discussion tonight. I've read a lot of books that have a brighter future as a setting. In my short experience of stuff, I would presume that something like that would start falling into the categories of Hopepunk. And so it's more of an optimistic future. It is not your Soylent Green future. And the dystopian futures that has been so popular in recent years. It's kind of the opposite of it.
All right, Shay?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. As someone who often focuses on YA, which favors dystopia frequently, I would call Hopepunk sort of a counterculture to the dark themes that arose. Really like in the 2010s. I think that was like the height of of dark YA. And now I think that Hopepunk is something that is emerging to offer a different avenue for literature after 2020, after some hard years. And I think people are really looking forward to it. So yeah, Hopepunk is a counterculture. It's part of the natural rhythm, I think, of like high and low, up and down that we go through thematically in literature, and we have emerged out of the dystopian dark area, and now I think we're swinging into light and funny and hopeful stories about the future.
Yeah, I look at Hopepunk as the opposite end of the spectrum from grimdark, which is a subgenre that I am familiar with. I've read quite a bit of that, and as far as I know, there is a lot more of that in the market right now than Hopepunk.
Sure, and I think Game of Thrones kind of epitomizes that, where first of all, it's violent, and many of the characters are rather amoral, and there's sometimes a sense of hopelessness about it. It's like it's a cruel world, and the good guys don't always win. Whereas I think in Hopepunk, there's a more hopeful approach to the future. It doesn't mean that the good guys always win, but no matter the injustice, whether it's social or whether it's climate caused or whatever, people are cooperating with each other to try to fight this to the point where it very much becomes the grimdark opposite. And I think a lot of speculative fiction, by which I mean science fiction and fantasy, is in conversation with itself. So I feel like this is a kind of literary response to grimdark, to say, hey, it doesn't always have to be dark. It doesn't always have to be about mean people that you wouldn't want to meet on a good day anyway. It could be about people trying to do the best they can in a world under difficult circumstances. I think that's the essence of Hopepunk.
So I've read stories where, the first act of the story is like describing the utopian environment in this setting, and then Act 2 shows you that it's just veneer, that underneath the hood of the utopia is a deep dark secret, or actually dystopian pillars holding the whole damn thing up.
Yeah,
I don't think
I think you're
Hopepunk is
describing
that
dystopia.
either. That's not Hopepunk.
Right. Hunger Games is not Hopepunk,
Right.
for example. Now, um, another thing that I've heard is that it's it's sort of like people kind of pushing for utopia, but they haven't gotten there. They're halfway down the block. They're doing their best to make a better world, but they're not necessarily there yet. Because fundamentally, I think utopias would be boring, right? But dystopias sometimes are like way too bleak and not someplace I'd want to visit.
Right. A story could start off, the people are, heavily challenged, colonists on a new planet, but it's how they, it's like the people against the environment, for instance, on a new planet that they're colonizing. If the characters in the plot are using very creative, very intelligent, very cooperative methodologies to solve their challenges, that's more like Hopepunk that I think.
That's an interesting discussion, actually. The fact that Hopepunk is not lollipops and rainbows. It's maybe more attitude, and I would argue perhaps societal attitude, not just one person's attitude. But yeah, I mean, Hopepunk would still have to grapple with conflict, right? Because otherwise, it's just not a story.
Sure.
So yeah, that's interesting.
But there's a great scene, and I know this isn't Hopepunk, but if you remember the movie Witness a number of years ago with the Harrison Ford, and I forget the actress now.
Great movie.
Yes, excellent movie. But at
Kelly
the end,
McGillis, is that?
Kelly McGillis, that's it.
Yeah.
At the end, the bad guys who have guns are basically stopped by Amish people without weapons who simply refuse to give up or give way. And so they end the conflict peacefully and at some risk to themselves. And I think, I mean, obviously that kind of predates the whole Hopepunk thing, but it's that type of thing that I think an unorthodox response to violence by using some kind of peaceful mechanism, I think would essentially be one of the planks that you could put into a Hopepunk story. Now, all of the genres that have punk in the title, it started off, I think, with cyberpunk, which was sort of like grimdark elements added to a high-tech future. There's this element of social disruption to anything that's punk. Cyberpunk, steampunk, diesel punk, Hopepunk. So how do you feel about Hopepunk as sort of a disrupting kind of subgenre that says, let's look at something from a different perspective?
I always look at stories. It's got to be stories and good characters first. I mean, you put the right characters in the right setting, and the challenge with Hopepunk is to create a plot that is hopeful, is optimistic, and in the way that they resolve their challenges. I think it's tougher than the typical story that you get out there of any kind. With protagonist, antagonist, challenge, goals, overcoming adversity, stuff like that. That doesn't necessarily have to be like that if they are a Hopepunk story.
Yeah, it's definitely odd because a lot of times you write a story that builds up to some kind of violent climax, and the Hopepunk isn't really about that. So how do you get your third act, emotional pizzazz that you need, but it's not the bad guy, it's not the good guy beating up the bad guy. It's something different. It's something more cooperative.
You know what I think is interesting about all of the punks you just listed there, Dave? You had steampunk, diesel punk, cyberpunk. All of those are resources. Steam, diesel, and cyber, which drive the story, the setting, the atmosphere. And so I think it's interesting to look at hope the same way, as a resource. when you think of the genre. It's a resource which drives the story and the atmosphere and the setting, the same as diesel, steam, and cyber. So I just think that's an interesting point.
Well, you can add solar punk to that,
right? Yep.
Climate punk, which are both things.
Right.
But I guess climate would be
Yeah,
the one
no,
exception. Climate's not a resource, but the other ones, yeah.
Well, climate is about resources in general.
It's about
I
resources.
would characterize climate punk and solar punk as subsets of hope punk, where I think that they are hope punk stories, but hope punk stories aren't necessarily climate punk and solar punk, if that makes sense.
Is that true? Because you could have a story regarding climate that is not hopeful at all. I mean, you know,
Actually,
climate disaster, we're in the midst of a new ice age.
Actually, you're right, because I've seen some of the works of Paolo Bacigalupi, for instance. I love his work, but I don't think it certainly qualifies as climate punk, but I don't think it necessarily qualifies as hope punk. Not always, anyway.
Right.
All right. So, what are some of the trademark elements of a hope punk story?
A society that has not destroyed the earth yet.
That's not necessarily true. I would say one of the critical elements for hope punk is optimism. I think I read somewhere the term weaponized optimism, and I can really see that for hope punk.
Now, hang on, Marty. If you're going to shoot down my idea, you got to argue it and defend it. So why would it not be a society that destroyed the earth yet?
You could have a hope punk story where the earth is already destroyed.
I don't know. I would call that a dystopia.
No, if the people are working together and they're optimistic and they're making headway, and the only antagonist in the story is the environment, that could be a very classic hope punk story.
If they're optimistic about, starting one valley at a time, we are going to re-terraform the earth and return it to what it was. And
they have a positive social structure and cooperation, and they, get stuff done and don't hurt anybody while they're doing it. That's hope punk.
I wouldn't feel like it's much hope punk if we don't at least leave the story with an earth that's not totally destroyed.
Oh, you don't have to. Like, I mean, a story, let's say, that is set in a future like the one in Star Trek, where money is no longer a thing. Everybody has what they need because of public replicators. Nobody goes hungry, nobody goes thirsty, nobody goes without shelter. And you could have a very positive environment, but you could still have people that have challenges. And you could very easily find an effective plot where the challenges are solved by, working together as a community, being optimistic, being competent, being innovative, and solving the issue. That would be totally categorized as hope punk.
And I think actually Star Trek is a good example where, especially the original series, there are some aspects about the Federation that have a distinctly hope punk kind of outlook. From as Marty mentioned, the absence of money to theoretically with matter replicators and stuff, you've eliminated hunger and things of that nature, and yet there's still problems out there that need to be solved. Now, I will say that Star Trek isn't always like that, but in some of its best episodes, it can be.
Right. So to Shay's point, to cede to Shay's point, you can have hope punk come from, a future that is blue skies and daisies.
Now, I will say I recently had a solar punk, a climate punk, hope punk story actually accepted for a fairly prestigious market that I can't talk about yet. I'm still under a gag order. And I will say that my climax was a conversation between some characters as they figured out what they wanted to do. and it was what was, I think, the most interesting about it was what they came up with was unexpected but made sense in terms of what I'd actually written as sort of a climate punk detective story. But like I said, the climax was a conversation over lunch.
I'm curious to see how you pulled that off. I'm sure you did, but I'm just curious.
It's okay. I'm biased, but I think it's one of my better stories, and I was very pleased with it. But let's get back to this. Some people have described Hopepunk as being utopian. I don't necessarily think that's true. Still, how do you think Hopepunk relates to utopias and dystopias? We've talked about that a little bit already.
Having a vision.
Go ahead, Shay.
Just having a vision of utopia as being an end goal, perhaps. In some cases, you can have stories that I mean, I think there's certainly overlap sometimes. Sometimes you can have stories that overlap, Hopepunk and utopia, but at least having utopia as something on the horizon, something to move towards, something
Yeah,
that's
I
still
think the horizon is the right place for it, if you want to know the truth.
something that still feels like you can go towards it, like it's still there to move towards.
See, my feeling about Hopepunk is I think Hopepunk is a smaller scale because any utopia would be wonderful for some people and an absolute nightmare for others. And Hopepunk is very much easier if it is, a smaller setting that's being used, So look at a story like Robinson Crusoe, which I loved as a kid. I don't know if you've seen the movie that, they had adversity, and through optimism and through, competence and hard work and working together, they built, the best treehouse in the known universe. And actually solved a lot of their problems to the point where when they got rescued, they said, why do we need to go back? And I look at that as a kind of a Hopepunk story.
Well, by that extension, I think The Martian could qualify as a Hopepunk story.
That is true.
It is all about cooperation. In fact, that's the only way he gets rescued is people go sacrifice their careers in order to go back to Mars to rescue him.
Yeah, sacrifice their careers, satisfy political secrets, to just save, Watney.
So another thing I've read about Hopepunk that I thought was very interesting, and I'm going to mention it here and let you guys comment on it. What I read described it as sort of an attempt to build a new mythos, where the old mythos is about how we live or how we used to live, and the new mythos is about how we live in this new world. What do you think of that?
I feel like every story is how we live in this new world because the world's always changing. And especially with characters that grow and have stuff happen to them. That's always true. So I guess I need a little bit more from you, Dave, about what you mean by that.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to answer that since like a lot of jargon.
Okay. I think it's to some extent it's about shifting, I guess, perspectives. It's how we used to live, let's say, in a world that didn't have climate problems, to how we live in a world now that perhaps does have climate problems and resource issues and global warming and such. And how do you live cooperatively in that new world because the old rules don't work for you anymore? That's what I think folks were trying to get at.
Still don't see a distinction though between that and regular storytelling.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's really all about the story. I think that you would categorize the story as Hopepunk after it's finished. You would recognize it as opposed to, building towards it, if that makes sense. I just want a good story. I want good characters. I want a good setting.
Yeah, I know that when I
For
read
Hopepunk, the only difference is they're moving through the story optimistically. They're moving through the story being competent, and they're moving through the story, working together as a society and, for the benefit of all. And sure, you might have a bad apple in a barrel or something, but even the way you resolve the antagonist in a Hopepunk, you're not just going to put a bullet in his head. You would convince the bad apple of the right thing to do. Or better yet, the bad apple would himself realize that he was wrong.
And that's why my Hopepunk story ended with a conversation.
Right.
But it was
instead of a bullet.
It was hard to write because I had to come up with a solution that was satisfying, but at the same time cooperative and not violent. So there's some interesting challenges to writing a Hopepunk story.
Do you think that Hopepunk lent itself better to short stories? Because I feel like the only examples I can think of have all been short stories.
The Martian.
Okay, but how about literature?
All Systems Read by Martha Wells.
Yeah, I think that Hopepunk has got a much smaller saturation in the market, and that might change. How trends change. That could be the next wave. Could be.
Yeah, I think there's a burgeoning presence of Hopepunk, but it's definitely there's definitely a lot more dystopian fiction and things of that nature than there is Hopepunk. But on the other hand, sometimes the Hopepunk story is kind of like a breath of fresh air because it feels like real people trying to solve real problems in a meaningful way without getting angry. In fact, in some ways, it feels almost the opposite of where the U.S. is right now. And I say that without trying to take a political side or anything.
Right. But I think literature now, books written and read, are not Hopepunk because right now people seem to like, action, adventure, and violence, and sex, and murder.
Although sometimes I want to have a story about people I can actually admire and care about. Maybe not the villain, but some of the other people. I think This Is Us is actually a fairly decent example of Hopepunk about people surviving an apocalypse using cooperative means.
Yeah, so far.
Sure.
Have you seen all the episodes that are out?
I have not.
Yeah, it's not all Hopepunk. Trust me.
Sure, and Star Trek wasn't all Hopepunk either, and yet I would describe the outlook of Star Trek in general as being positive and optimistic, but not everywhere, not all the time, and that seems like a little bit like life to me.
Right.
All right,
what are your extra thoughts? You've been awful quiet down there.
Yeah. I get quiet when you guys start talking about things I've never seen or read. So I can tell you about YA, video games that you guys have never played.
Come on, you've seen The Martian.
I think the market is primed for a YA Hopepunk story. It'd be really a good idea to write a book, a chapter book that parents would approve of.
Come on, we don't think about parents when we write YA.
But they're the ones with the credit cards.
I feel like Ready Player
One. I was the parent that liked to read the books my kids read, just because it was easier to get them to talk at the dinner table if you read the same books they did.
I think Ready Player One.
Even the crappy ones.
Oh, no more bashing Twilight.
Yeah, but Captain Underpants was awesome, though.
I will say,
Just
however, I do think that, for instance, Ready Player One could qualify as Hopepunk. It really is about people cooperating in order to try to beat the evil corporation and build a better future. It just happens that a good portion of that future is online.
Yeah, well, it also had big
Ready Player
gangs of
One.
villains. It had big gangs of villains that murdered a lot of people too.
Hmm.
So I would argue against that being Hopepunk because it did have dystopian components.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
he was homeless. He lived in a van for goodness sake. And you know, the real world wasn't all that nice for these people.
That is true. All right. Last thoughts about Hopepunk?
Yeah, I think it would be a challenge to write a story that was optimistic and not violent and still an interesting story that would engage readers and you know, keep them turning pages. I think I would really like to think that maybe if you had one that had a lot of humor in it, in addition to challenges that were overcome and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that would be a hard road to hoe, really.
Shay?
My final thought is that the time for Hopepunk is now. I am certain of it. My agent has said it. I don't think she actually said Hopepunk, but she described, optimistic, where possible, light, funny, that kind of thing, is really what publishers and readers are interested in right now. And again, I think that's just a natural cycle that we're going through. But I'm interested in seeing where the genre goes. It's still new to me. I think that it has a great future. I'm hopeful about Hopepunk. Look at that. So yeah, I want to see more of it, and just would love to see how it evolves.
And I'm kind of in the realm of, I've read a lot of stories about heroes sort of single-handedly solving problems, and the idea of people cooperating together to solve problems and building teams and doing stuff to make a difference seems realistic sometimes in a way that the supremely competent hero always beating the bad guys all by himself just doesn't seem as real. So I'm kind of interested in Hopepunk from those aspects. And then as a writer, I mean, the challenge of writing a Hopepunk story is it's an interesting challenge. I've accomplished it, I think, in good form once, and it wasn't easy. It feels like it's a good way to test myself.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, guys, and that's it for this week. And we'll see you again next time. Thanks a lot.